Hi, this is Amanda with Juni Learning, and you're listening to the Growing Up Ready podcast. This is a podcast designed to help parents and kids prepare for the real world by offering practical advice on everything from academics to entrepreneurship. Each episode features interviews with successful parents, experts, educators, and young achievers who share their stories and insights on how to navigate life's challenges. Today, we're joined by Brad Weinstein, who is the founder and CEO of Teacher Goals, who will be speaking about his own insight on how parents, educators, and students can achieve success. Thank you for joining us, Brad.
Thanks for having me on.
Great. Do you mind expanding a little bit on my introduction of you to give some context to your work and the work of Teacher Goals?
Sure. So our work is primarily publishing books, getting the best resources in the hands of educators and parents, making sure that we're helping educators' job be as easy as it can be. It's a very tough and demanding job, so our hope is providing resources to make their job and make them, better at their craft while also providing value as an organization. I personally do a lot of work with schools when it comes to working on restorative practices and social emotional learning, trauma informed practices, and other things like that. But recently, as an organization, we've been focusing a lot on the emerging trend of AI, artificial intelligence, and how that looks, what it's going to look like, how it impacts future readiness with students, and how the teachers can best work with those issues that might come up with artificial intelligence.
Great. Very relevant for our conversation today. I'm not sure how much context you have around Juni's work with artificial intelligence. Juni Learning, our classic and core product, is a online learning solution for students primarily to learn STEM subjects one-on-one with tutors. But we do have AI offerings through Discord, homework help through Discord, and live tutors. So this is such a relevant time to be having that conversation. I'd love to get in just briefly to your background in education. How did you enter this field? What was your story beyond and before starting Teacher Goals?
Sure. So when I was a teenager, I worked a lot with younger kids, and through my dad's business, we worked a lot with kids. And when I was working with them, I thought, it won't be really that hard, I think, to teach them how to add, how to do math, how to read, and things like that. And I went into elementary education thinking you could just love kids and it wouldn't be that hard of a job. The reality is, I started teaching, and it's really hard to teach kids how to read and how to do basic addition and subtraction and all that kind of stuff. So I love kids. It just was a lot tougher of a job teaching the content and working with the students than I thought. So I worked in elementary for a period of time, and I loved it and I enjoyed it. And I realized that elementary age was just not my cup of tea. Just the age group was not my cup of tea.
Yeah.
And again, I work with elementary schools. I give praise. I have 3 kids in the elementary level age myself. It's just that I ended up getting to middle school science for over a decade. And strangely, that was my jam, working with the middle school age. And it's not for everyone, that's for sure. A lot of people, they either want to go into high school teaching or they want to go into elementary teaching. We're kind of in limbo in the middle. And after a time at the elementary level, over a decade, I decided to pursue school administration. I was a high school principal, and then I was a director of curriculum and instruction. And ultimately, I wrote a book, Hacking School Discipline, that took me away from the school setting, working with schools worldwide.
Got it. And was writing that book really the catalyst for starting Teacher Goals, or was there another moment that kind of was your aha moment that you needed to move in that direction?
So Teacher Goals had been started around 2014 while I was still in the classroom, and I had no intention of it ever being anything other than just a place that I provided some inspiration for teachers, some humor for teachers. It wasn't really a business yet, in regards to, going out and working with schools or, doing books and podcasts and, live shows and all that kind of stuff. So that really came about within the last few years. So after I had written my book and after I had, gone out and after I had some success in that realm, we started taking a look at what we were doing on our end with teacher goals. Like our website wasn't that great. Our resources weren't that numerous or plentiful. So we really started focusing in the last 2 or 3 years, maybe 4 years, on becoming more of a brand in education that provided value and resources to teachers versus just a great social media account to follow.
Right. So it sounds like you're really focused on improving the life and the work life of educators. What are some of the biggest challenges you think educators are facing right now? I'm sure this is top of mind as you're actively working to address some of those challenges, but I'm sure it also goes beyond that.
Absolutely. The biggest threat, I think, is just time. When we're in education, innovation happens so slowly, and there's a lot of red tape, a lot of barriers to implementing anything really. But the reality is that when you're creating a new car at a company and you're an engineer, you spend all day, every day focusing on improving that car. Whereas when if you're in any industry where you're improving and innovating, that's your job. So if teachers' main job was just to improve and to go to more future ready skills, or the main job was to do, artificial intelligence or how to plan better units in curriculum, and they had numerous hours a day to do so, we would move a lot quicker with change in education. The reality is that they're with kids all day long. So they have to live in the moment with students versus focusing on the future, focusing on the past. And anytime they have in the classroom, or on their prep period, it gets eaten by meetings, emails, other responsibilities, other duties as assigned. So the reality is that we need to give teachers collaboration time together to sit in a room and do what's best for students and to make those important changes and innovations. So I would say time would be the biggest thing. And I would also say behavior is one of the biggest things right now because we're coming off of the pandemic, right? Like we had, we're talking about this academic gap that occurred. The reality is, I think it's not just an academic gap, it's more so a social emotional gap. Like we don't know how to sit in a room for 45 minutes. We don't know how to be in a line for the bathroom. We don't know how to resolve conflict. We don't know how to talk face to face with people like we used to, right? So
Mm.
big part of my work and again in working with schools is that social emotional component and working with those big behaviors that are occurring because it's tough when you have 30 kids in a room and you have 5 kids that are constantly disrupting class.
Absolutely. So it's kind of coming from both sides, where the time you're with students, you're struggling to even make that productive because of the distractions coming from behavioral issues. And then when you're not with students, you really don't have the time necessary to consider improvements. You're just surviving.
Exactly. We're stuck in that survival mode a lot in the classroom and it's not what's best for the kids. We need to give teachers more time again together, and it's easier said than done, but the funding's not there. The responsibilities keep on getting added to their plate versus there's never we're going to take this off your plate this year. It's always, here are the new things we're doing on top of your already overflowing plate. So the good thing about this artificial intelligence revolution is that the goal of this is not just to add something to do with their plates, it's to actually make their job easier because now we can do some things with the aid of artificial intelligence that actually makes your job more, you can be more efficient, you can do things quicker, you can spend more time in the innovation, more time in the relationship building with your students. So it's just a matter of educators who are immediately pushing it away and saying this is not good for education or for our students, and the educators that are willing to look into it and explore it further.
Yeah. Well, it seems like you're kind of describing a domino effect, right? Where even when we're looking at behavioral issues in the classroom, maybe the immediate solution to come to mind is not AI. But what you're pointing out is that if AI can save teachers time, what is the solution is more time, at least part of the solution.
Absolutely.
Um, and so it might not be the most like immediately intuitive, solution to go to, but it's certainly at play. Great. So we did notice
Absolutely.
that Teacher Goals has published several books on the impact of technology, AI, and education. Um, do you have some use cases for how AI is already being used in classrooms? And give us a little bit of a practical insight on how teachers are already leveraging this, or if not, if they're not so much, how they could be.
Absolutely. So in our book, we're talking about the AI classroom, the ultimate guide to artificial intelligence in education. There are definitely use cases in this book of what it's already being used for. It's so early though. AI has been around for a long time. It's been around since, the 50s. It's been a lot. I mean, it was even thought of way before that when we go back to the, way back in time. Even with, before ChatGPT, which really sprung this race, and made it accessible to everyone. There were already products like it. Netflix is telling you, what you should watch based on what you've already watched. Artificial intelligence is telling you what you should buy, in products. It's been something that, in cars, like cars are navigation, everything is artificial intelligence,
Yeah.
and cell phones. Like it's already been here for a long period of time. It's just now students have access to this open source, open AI, and so do the adults. And what do we do with that? How does it work? So again, now it's not just Googling something such as, what is the capital of such and such. Now it is, tell me three of the most important facts about, this location, and what would you do there if you were a 10-year-old kid? Like you can ask such specific questions and get such specific, answers with this technology that didn't exist. So now you can generate almost what you want versus having to find somebody else having already written on it in a blog or,
Hmm.
a publication or anything like that. So you can create content with it versus just find content with it. So in the classroom, we've seen all kinds of great cases. There's teachers that are developing cross-curricular units with it, so they can take this standard with history, to talk about World War II, talk about this technology standard, how this technology standard interplays, and take these narrative or these argumentative essay standards. And imagine you're a teacher teaching seventh grade history, and you want to make sure that you're hitting this also. You want to make sure you're hitting these other two standards. Write a lesson plan that introduces this to your students. So you can actually spend so much time just thinking about all of these connections where this can help prompt you and guide you towards, the logical connections that already exist, and then you can better those connections. So planning has been a huge one, lesson planning. Students in the classrooms can take an essay they've written and take the rubric that their teacher has given them, and they can say, look at this rubric and look at my writing. How would you grade me in each category and give me specific feedback? So as a teacher, if it takes you even 10 minutes to grade something and you have 150, 180 students at the secondary level, it takes weeks because again, you have all of your normal job responsibilities on top of your grading responsibilities, right? It takes weeks. Students don't care about the feedback 3 weeks after they've written the paper. Like just to be real, like they don't see the value in it as much as they used to. Imagine being able to get immediate feedback on your writing from something that's unbiased. Like the teacher can grade 17 essays in a row and get tired and just start marking stuff, right? Like we're humans, like we're going to not be
Yeah.
consistent every time we grade anything, right? Um, but this technology, will take what you've written and it'll grade it consistently. It doesn't care who you are, the machine doesn't care how many papers it's graded. It will give you that feedback. So we can actually better our writing and before the teacher even grades it, right? So we can actually see this feedback as a student. We can ask it to how do I make a better rhyme scheme? Am I using proper punctuation? Is this hitting the depth of knowledge, as anticipated? Am I making a strong connection? You can even run a sentiment analysis and get tone of voice. Like, is this overly optimistic or is this a negative viewpoint of this? So when I'm thinking about that, it's the student feedback. The parents at home, they can take any content, and my dad or my mom wouldn't have known how to help me in physics, and they didn't in high school, right? Like when parents are at home with their kids, you can turn ChatGPT into a tutor. You can say, explain to me the solution to this problem and give me a step-by-step breakdown and exactly why this happened. When you have a paperback textbook, that doesn't exist. You're just stuck there at home without, you can't help your kid, and if you're not a English teacher, you can't help their kid with their writing assignment if they're asking them to write at something that you didn't, you did 30 years ago in the classroom, if you even did it at all. So it's a help at home. It's a help for the students. The things that students are generating, like, we used to be able to get PowerPoint by death, right? Like the student presentations,
Hmm.
every presentation was a PowerPoint based on their learning. So even if they were doing products or artifacts about project-based learning or products with some sort of, student-driven project, they all made PowerPoints.
Yeah.
Whereas now if you say you're going to make something like a podcast, or you say you're going to make an app, or you say you're going to create a video, there's so many AI tools that can be used to actually make these things instead of just talk about these things in our
Mm-hmm.
student artifacts.
Yeah, and
So
I'd
again, there's
imagine that
countless use cases.
that impacts student confidence, right? This ability to do things they envision that maybe they would have had barriers to accomplishing.
Absolutely.
There
Absolutely. I mean,
is,
they're not coders
yeah,
necessarily when they're 11, but now they can write code even with ChatGPT. So it helps with anything you ever can imagine you wanted to do.
yeah. One thing that comes up a lot for us in our conversations with educators is obviously the concern about AI's relationship to integrity and using it to cheat, it disrupting the learning process in a negative way. Have you found those concerns come up when you discuss AI with educators?
Everywhere. Like everyone is concerned with what the negative impacts are, right? Just like everyone was
Mhm.
concerned about what about the internet? The internet, oh my gosh, we can use the internet now to cheat. We can Google answers to questions on homework assignments. Our calculators are going to ruin our number sense, and every technology that comes out in schools is always going to face opposition, and understandably so. But the thing is that now with AI, we have to be just as competent as we ever have been because we need to know if what we're getting outputted is actually legit and makes sense.
Mhm.
So in other words, if I tell it to write me an essay on a certain topic, I don't actually know if it's a good essay. I don't know if it made a proper argument. I don't know if it fits this criteria. Um, when we're looking at this, you have to use your human component to know if what's being outputted is good so you can improve it yourself. Like you have to be a content expert yourself, or else you're going to get something that you don't know what it means. And
Mhm.
again, you could turn in something to a teacher and they could just ask you, hey, explain this to me in your own words. And if you have no idea what the heck is going on, so when you look at assessments, it's not just maybe we shouldn't just do essays as our assessments. Maybe an essay should be part of it, but part of it is presenting on it. Part of it is an application or an artifact or something that better demonstrates your understanding of it. But the reality is too is that when we're typing something now, we have Grammarly as adults, we have spell check as adults, we have editors when we're doing a paper and we're writing a book. This technology does a lot of those things that humans would help you with in the first place. It's just that now it's immediate feedback. So yes, you can certainly ask a question of it and have you output an answer, but that's not learning. But when you look at something like a poem, you can feed it your own poem and ask them about the rhyme scheme, ask it about this criteria, ask it about that criteria. What word can I use instead of this word to make it rhyme? You can use it as an ally or as a collaborator. But the reality is that in our co-author Dan Fitzpatrick, he's going to call it the new digital divide. He's going to say there's going to be people who know how to use AI and people who don't. So it's not who has technology and who doesn't. Who can use this? So in the workplace, when these kids go out into the workplace, I could do this task in half an hour, whereas my people who don't know how to use AI are going to take 8 hours to do the same amount of work.
Mhm.
So are we really preparing students for the future, or are we putting them at a disadvantage if we're not tackling how we can use this as a collaborator? So yes, plagiarism is of a great concern. It always has been, even with Google, even when we had books in the library where we could take text from it and copy it. It's just that we have to embrace the possibilities as well and not use those fears as a reason to just shut down what already, and the doors box is already open, right? It's not going
Yeah.
back in the box. So what are we going to do as educators to really embrace that while being cautious about plagiarism?
Yeah, it's a really relevant message, especially for us as we kind of introduce the podcast. The goal of this podcast is to help everyone understand how we can prepare children for the real world. This is why Junie teaches coding classes to kids, why we teach STEM, things that are not always taught in public education settings. Because we saw a gap where kids needed to learn certain skills in order to, in our opinion, become effective adults in the modern economy. Um, and so I'm curious, obviously, we've talked a bit here about how AI is one of those innovations that likely is better to be adopted because it will hopefully help produce more adapted adults to the modern society. Are there any other innovations on the forefront of education that you think need to be adopted faster?
When you think about innovations, we need to go back to the basics with what makes us human. So with this artificial intelligence on the rise, what is the role of humanity? So when I think about innovations, we need to better focus on what makes us human, such as our emotional intelligence, such as our social emotional learning, our ability to problem solve, be complex thinkers. So all of those future ready skills we've already talked about, those need to really be focused on. So when we collaborate, in the workplace, emotional intelligence has shown to be the most prevalent and most important skill above all other skills that exist, right? So, are we working on that and really modeling that and, and giving them feedback on their ability to problem solve, their ability to collaborate with the team, their ability to use self-management, relationship management. So I would say it's almost the opposite of what we might think of as innovating, but it really is innovating because we kind of lost that, along the way when we got test and drilling kids to death with, state tests and things like that. We kind of got into a regurgitative model of just digesting information and regurgitating it versus how are we able to better work with teams? How are we be able to manage our own emotions? How are we able to use conflict resolution?
Mhm.
So my hope is that we can spend more time on those skills because we'll have more time because we are using artificial intelligence to, again, take some of the other monotonous things off of our plate so that we're spending more of our time with that. Because going to the workplace, you're going to have to know how to do all those things. And the people that are going to rise quicker in the job, in the workplace, and the people that are not going to get fired, and the people that are going to be successful are going to be those people with high emotional intelligence.
Absolutely. So when we kind of ask that core question of what parents and educators can be doing to support their children's education and prepare them for the real world, your answer is actually really help them navigate their emotional maturity, really help them understand conflict
Absolutely.
resolution, really help them understand empathy, because that is more valuable even than being a phenomenal coder in a difficult coding language, because this emotional skill
Absolutely.
set is universal.
I mean, there was even an article recently about I think it was by Forbes. I could be mistaken, but it was about the stereotypical tech jerk, the guy in the office that is like a genius in coding and a genius in all these skills, but he's terrible to his, he's arrogant and terrible to his coworkers. When the reality is that that technical skill is going to be done more by AI than by humans, moving forward. So the person that is just a genius in one certain aspect of their job is going to get outdated by the people that are good collaborators and good teammates. So it's almost a bad thing for people that are, heavy in skill but bad in relationships.
Yeah, I completely agree. And honestly, it's not an answer we get a lot when we ask these questions. They do tend to be more technologically focused answers, but this makes complete sense to me. We hear a lot on social media online about how difficult teaching is, the act of teaching, the culture of teaching. What advice would you have for a young person who is pursuing education as a career?
Right. So it's on the decline everywhere, right? Like people are leaving the field, people are not going into the field. And when we look into people that want to do this job, it is a very tough sell, for the respect, for the pay that you get, and just knowing that you're going to be understaffed, under-resourced at a lot of locations. But the reality is that, if you're going to go into this field, you have to realize that, a lot of people are going to think or not like teachers or not like education or public education. You have to go into it because you really love it and you're going to make a difference because you can.
Mm,
Even more so than technology, even more so than anything that exists, that human relationship is going to be key for so many kids, especially the kids that don't have, everything they need and resources and time and, family and support systems and things like that. So when you go into it, you got to focus on the things like the social emotional learning, the emotional intelligence. You have to build those relationships, but you also have to go in there thinking that I'm going to hold kids accountable for their behaviors and I'm going to hold them to a high standard academically because you can love them to death, but if you're not going to hold them to high standards in both behavior and academics, you're doing them a disservice. So,
mhm.
go into it because you love kids and you love students, but go into it knowing that part of your job is to get them to achieve at the highest level, no matter what their background is, no matter what their socioeconomic status is, no matter what their trauma is. So you have to do both. You have to give them love, but tough love. And when you find that balance, you're going to be very successful in the classroom. So, yes, it's a great career if you go into it. It's just a matter of, making your life more manageable and better and more efficient by, going into it with that mindset.
Absolutely. And how do you, as someone who's clearly an expert in education, a lot of experience in public education, how do you see the public education system evolving in response to these teacher and talent shortages and this lower interest in entering the field?
It's going to be tough because we're going to have more technological solutions. We're going to have more online, we're going to have people remotely teaching science to, kids on 5 campuses, or because we can't find science teachers or math teachers. It's not, we're going to have to use technology more because of the lack of humans that are going to be available, which again, technology can help, it can aid. It's not meant to be a complete replacement for the human. It's meant to aid the human. And, I just see we become more and more dependent on the technology because the human aspect is going to, the human capital, the human availability is going to go down. My hope is that because of the artificial intelligence revolution, and hopefully there'll be changes in the public perception of educators, and there'll be more funding and all of those great things, and we'll pay people what they're worth. But my hope is that the people that are in the profession again have more manageable lives because they are grading less, because they're planning less, and they're spending more time doing what they love. So
Mm-hmm.
even with technology being able to help and aid what we do, it's not going to replace you. It's just going to make it so instead of working 20 hours a week overtime, which is another whole issue, right? Maybe you're working 10 or 5.
Yeah.
So again, we still need you. It's just a matter of you're going to actually be able to have a work-life balance to some extent, which doesn't exist, as is very well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm curious because you mentioned you're a parent as well, right?
Hmm.
How
Yep.
does
Three
your
kids.
amazing, I have one, so you're a 3 times more advanced parent than I am. But how does your insight on education change the way you guide your own children through their education journeys?
It made me have more empathy for the teachers, honestly, because I went or and it also made me have more empathy for the parents too, because when I come home and my kids have an hour of homework in, 4th grade, and then my daughter has reading to do and my other son has something else to do, it made me realize that, I'm an educator and sometimes I struggle to have the time to work with my own kids. Then you have parents that have, single parent households. Then you have, parents that aren't necessarily able to help their kids with their homework because they themselves are reading at an 8th grade level and they have high schoolers, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I look at this too as wow, maybe those science fair projects weren't so great after all when the parents had to, go out and buy the poster board in the middle, at 9 o'clock at night to help their kid,
Yeah.
or the shoot, or the dioramas, and the things that are just cute but take a lot of the times from the parents. I realize, man, maybe we need to do more in the class and leave family time at home for family time. But at the same time, as a parent, it's hard for me to see my kids being disciplined in a non-restorative way, or to be graded in a non-best practice way for grading, that allows that growth mindset and allows for improvement. So it's hard for me sometimes when I see practices and I'm the parent and I can't just, call the teacher and say, hey, based on this article and this research, this says this, because I don't want to be that person, um, you
Yeah.
know. But at the same time, it's hard to just sit back and let things slide. But what I've noticed is that, wow, my child's teachers really do a lot for my kids, and I understand what they're going through and I understand their struggle. So it's almost like an empathy thing where I know how hard they're working because I was in that job and I know how hard it is. But at the same time, it's harder for me to look at practices that I don't agree with and not be able to, give any input or say anything about that. So it's kind of a two-edged, a double-sided thing for me.
Mm-hmm.
But the main thing I've learned is the empathy for the parents too. Like I didn't have the empathy before I had kids. Like I just thought, I assigned homework without thinking about the family impact as much and how
Yeah.
much time it would take away from that family time. So, once I became a parent, I started to realize that we need to get most of everything we can done in class. Some kids chose to do hardly anything during class, so they had work at home to do. But my goal was to never just give kids homework walking out the door. It
Mm,
was, if you don't finish this task that we have plenty of time to do today, then you have to finish it at home.
mhm,
Versus, I'm going at home with 15 vocabulary words to practice that night.
mm. Yeah, very interesting. And do you encourage your children to utilize AI in their own education and some of those emerging technologies?
Well, they're fourth, first, and going
Oh,
into kindergarten next
they're a
year.
little too
So
young.
not not as much. But my
Yeah.
son, my fourth grade son, who is pretty. I consider him to be pretty advanced. He thinks he's a teenager already. He's just turned 10. But we've already had conversations about AI, and we're talking about giving him, some access to Midjourney or some of these art generating platforms. And we wrote a children's book together using ChatGPT 4.
Mm,
And I was like, hey, like, what's a topic that you think would be a good story? So we actually practiced together getting a book that was pretty funny. And he was quite blown away with that. I mean, he uses Canva already and some of those AI tools in
mhm.
Canva. So it's a matter of it's so fresh and so new that even I'm exploring it with my fourth grader. I can only imagine 3 years from now what fourth graders are doing actually in school versus just dabbling in it right now because it's so new.
Yeah, it's interesting as a parent, you're taking this very hands-on approach to kind of being there with your child as they're exploring an emerging technology. I don't know what your experience was growing up, but I'm a young millennial. I was growing up with a lot of emerging technology, and my parents were not really using it. So I was really exploring it on my own. And I think a lot of people in my generation see the downfalls of that and see how dangerous that really was in hindsight. Is that your advice to parents to really step into each area of technology and exploration alongside your child and be very hands-on in that
Absolutely.
process?
Absolutely. If you don't know what your kids are doing online, it's a problem. Like they're
Mhm.
Snapchatting, they're doing, they're having like group chats on their phones. We had a group chat show. It was called Shade Room when I was a high school principal, where people were just talking trash about their classmates. We have people sharing pictures they shouldn't be sharing, with each other. We have, kids watching things on YouTube that they shouldn't be watching. We should always be very engaged with what our kids are doing with technology and know what they're doing. Their phones shouldn't go with them. At 9 o'clock at night, the phones come out here and we're going to bed, kind of thing like that. So, yes, even before AI, we should have always been very in tune with the technology that our kids were using,
Yeah.
because it can get very dangerous very quickly, especially online. Not everyone has good intentions that they're talking to. Cyberbullying is definitely extremely prevalent. When I was in school, there was no cyberbullying because if you did something, you had to have people talk about you in school to each other about it.
Yeah.
And I'm a geriatric millennial, so I got my first computer as a junior, and it was one of those
Uh,
big box screens. So we didn't really have cell phones that much in high school, and now it's just the technology is just you can spread a rumor instantly by posting a picture of somebody at a party, and now everyone sees it instantly. So
mhm.
when working with AI, yes, you want your kids to be, you want to be right there with them, seeing what they're doing, how they're doing it, being able to work with them through it. And not
Mhm.
every kid has that, unfortunately, because again, not every household has parents that are fluent in technology or has, the ability to be there with their kid when they get home from school. So, but I would say that if you have a kid in any way, shape, or form, you have to be involved as much as you can because they're going to learn things at school. But the bad side of technology, the dangerous side of technology, is something that falls after school hours for the most part.
Yeah, so kind of the message is don't allow the dangers of technology to keep you from allowing your child to explore it and be able to utilize it for good. It's interesting to hear, from someone who's an advocate of AI in the classroom and AI adoption for students and teachers, that that is absolutely not at the cost of technological safety and
Oh,
reasonable limitations. Yeah.
never. It's never going to keep me from it. It's never going to keep my kids from it. It's just that I have to be on top of it and talk about the dangers of it with them. Talk about what can happen if you share a picture. Show them, people that are not, talk about people that don't have their best interest at mind because they're going to be on technology somewhere somehow. No matter how, like, just like the people that keep their kids completely sheltered from everything in the world, it's not going to help them when they actually face those challenges and obstacles in real life, right? So again,
Mhm.
we have to be aware and weary of the dangers while also helping them navigate the reality of the world, which is technology is you need technology to be successful in almost any job now. So we can't keep them from it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks so much for chatting with me today. I have kind of one final question for you, but then we'll be wrapping up. And my final question is really wanting to get some insight on upcoming projects or initiatives that you're working on teacher goals. What can we expect next from you?
We're getting into Canva and how Canva can be used for students and for teachers because Canva
Mhm.
is becoming so popular nowadays. And we have a big book coming about design thinking and changing schools and how it functions. So a lot of things we talked about before,
Mhm.
schools are not set up to do them. So, with our upcoming book, it's going to explore how schools can rethink and rearrange their schedules and their time and identify these barriers and how we can overcome those barriers. So almost change from within a school. So addressing all these problems I talked about and actually tackling them in a way that can make it happen. So, a lot of books coming out, a lot of projects coming out, a lot of initiatives coming out from us, and it just grows every day.
Just like you, we are trying to find ways to help students and teachers engage with AI, and we're very receptive to feedback from educators about how we can do that better and what they really need at this time. And so we just are so appreciative of you coming to join us today and giving us your insights, and appreciate your willingness to share what you have to offer with our community. So thank you again for your time, and I hope you have a great day.
You too. Thanks for having me on. You have a great rest of your day as well.
All right. Bye-bye.